I'm really excited to be here. I first want to say on behalf of Poder in Action, thank you to Prescott College for inviting us to this wonderful weekend. I know I was super inspired, or I am super inspired by everything that I saw this weekend, and I know that our youth is too. They had to go back to Phoenix. It's senior art project, so they had to go back to their senior presentations. So you all have been a true inspiration, watching not only the youth from Poder, like I said, grow into leadership roles, but many from across the country. Many of you have traveled so far. Wisconsin, that's what's up. And it's beautiful. You guys are so proud of all the work that you're doing, and you were eager to share it, and I'm super stoked to see what you guys do in the future. As before was said, I am a student at Prescott College. I am a mother of two. I'm super queer, and I'm super happy all the time. And I honestly and truthfully believe that it is my duty to provide a life for my kids that was better than the one that I was given. And so I love what I do. I am a community college organizer in Phoenix. I basically go on to community college campuses, and because nobody ever comes and talks to community college students, right? They knock on the doors when they want our votes, but they don't actually try and engage. And so that's what I do. I go into community college classrooms, and I talk to those students, and I work with them, and I help them organize campaigns, and help develop their leadership, right? A little bit about Poder. We are a human rights organization, and we build power to disrupt and dismantle unjust systems. And we also determine a liberated future for people of color in Arizona, right? We operate by the 3 Ds: disrupt, dismantle, determine. Excuse me. So we use our lived experiences and as a form of power, right? We all have that inherent knowledge of our lives, of our experiences, and that is a form of organizing. We use civic participation. We use leadership development skills. We start as young as freshmen in high school. We have 3 programs: Ignite, which is our high school program, which some of you met some of our students yesterday. We have Free the People, FTP for short. That's my program, the community college program. And then we also have Barrios, and that is the parent program. We organize multi-generational, multilingual, and it's beautiful. Right now, the criminal justice system and immigration system is targeting our communities, separating families through incarceration and deportation. And we all know this to be fact. Most importantly, they're killing us in the streets. The work that we do at Poder holds accountability to those people in power. Phoenix Police Department has been the deadliest police department in the country last year, and so far this year as well. To make matters worse, government at city, state, federal level is stealing our money directly from our communities. They refuse to invest in neighborhoods and in our people. And a lot of the work that we do at Poder is getting that investment, right? Divesting from policing and investing in communities. And all that does is perpetuate this cycle, right? We ask for a little bit of trust, and they send us more police. And that's what the city of Phoenix is calling safety these days. But we are redefining safety. At Poder in Action, we are working a campaign right now, redefining what safety and true safety looks like in our communities. Real safety centers the health of our people, solutions for social problems, and the financial investment that we need to thrive in our communities and not just survive. Most of us are just surviving, and we want to be thriving. They say, and this is something that we say all the time, right? They say, cops make us safe, but we say, we make us safe. Because we are centered in the expressions at Poder, in Lakesh. You are another me, and I am another you. And Ubuntu. I am because we are. And we believe that very, very closely. Our community is strong and beautiful because as people, we are one. Because we have to invest in one another. Investing in our relationships and our learning, investing in healing, investing in learning and in our dreams. And to do this, it takes action. Intentional and deliberate action. One of the best memories of my life, and prime example, actually, of investment in community is when I met Patrisse in 2016. It was actually during the very first campaign that I ever worked on, Basta Arpaio. We were so successful. We ousted Joe Arpaio, the sheriff. And at that time, I actually had no idea I wanted to organize at all. I went to culinary school. I was a chef for 15 years. I had no idea, you know? But I knew in that moment, I knew I wanted to make a change. Doing all the work and volunteering at Puente and other organizations, I knew that I wanted to do something. And so we were walking to a detention center in Eloy, and you were pregnant at the time. Oh yeah, sorry. And I started talking, and my kids outed me as a fangirl. And but Patrisse invited me to LA. She had just met me, out the gate. She invited me to LA, and I went. I drove to LA to see a stranger. I went to her show, and I'd never seen anything like it before. It was probably one of the most beautiful things that I'd ever been to. It was a space filled with multi-generational, queer, bilingual, primarily Black folks. And I cried. I really did. I stood in the corner and cried all night because it was that beautiful. And what was life-changing for me in that moment was that Patrisse made an investment in me, right? She didn't know me, but she invested her time. She invested her wisdom, and she invested her heart, right? If I call her because I want to go to a thing or text her, she's like, yeah, put me down. Advance your knowledge. Continue your education. I'm there. Her action did something, right? In that moment, it seemed really small, maybe, right? But it actually changed me forever. She took me in, literally. She let me sleep on her couch. And she showed me what was possible. Possible through building community. A kind of community, actually, that we're building in Phoenix now. And so that's, I get to say it is my greatest pleasure and honor to get to introduce one of the guiding examples of Black organizing in my life, Patrisse.
You'll get to know that I'm super sensitive, so that was super sweet. Thank you, Parris. Hi. Hi. Folks from all over the country, how we doing? If you are able to stand, let me just have you stand up for a little bit. If you're not able to stand, raise your arms up. My least favorite thing is talking to audiences. Not because I don't like to talk, I actually like to talk a lot. They used to tell me I talk too much. I used to get in trouble. I don't know if they do that in grade school anymore, where they have a comment section. Well, mine was always talks too much. But I think what I really am excited about when I come to these spaces is less about talking to you and way more about how are we gathering together to change this place. How are we having engaged conversations? So before I start, I just want you to talk to your neighbor, and the first question I'm going to ask you is, what are you doing to change, what are you doing and contributing to help change what's happening to most marginalized communities? And just take a couple sentences and tell the person next to you. Go for it. All right, wrap your sentence up, wrap it up. And I love this. I love these conversations. So if I can get everybody's attention, folks, go ahead and take your seat. Go ahead and take your seat. And just by a show of hands, how many people in this room identify as a community organizer? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you identify as a community organizer. Be proud of it. You can raise your hand high. That's what I'm talking about. How many people in the room identify as an artist? Oh, that's like half and half the room. How many people in the room are still trying to figure out like what you're identifying as, and that's why you're kind of here at this conference? That's also half the room. I don't know. I wasn't good at math, so I don't know how that worked out. But I lead with those questions because when I come and talk to folks, and I know people are here because you want to hear about Black Lives Matter, you want to hear about a movement that really changed an entire generation, you want to hear about a movement that really stands on the shoulders and the long legacy of Black people who have survived over and over again, a country that has continued to try to deny our basic human rights, a country that has continued to put the boot on our neck, and a country that has continued to kill our families and our communities, right? You want to hear about Black Lives Matter, right? Yes. Well, you don't sound that excited, so. I'm confused, because I definitely got on the plane early this morning to come talk to you. Remember, I'm here, 3D. This is not a TV screen. It's not a phone. This is real time. But I'm here to talk about Black Lives Matter for sure. I'll give you that. Well, you'll get to hear about the story, and we'll hear about the exciting things we've done. But more importantly, I'm here to organize you. I'm a community organizer. And when I show up to spaces, it's not to entertain. When I show up to spaces, I come to those spaces guaranteeing that at least half the room is going to join the movement if you haven't already. When I come into spaces, I'm also making a request to other organizers. And I'm going to burst your bubble a little bit, and I don't want you to feel like I'm hating on you. But you're not a community organizer if you only use social media. Sorry, guys. That's not what a community organizer is. Although you're doing great activism, I'm glad if you use your platform to talk about what's happening in your communities and you're showing up and naming it, but that's not a community organizer. You want me to tell you what it is? Yes. Okay. So, a community organizer is someone who is waking up every single morning with a couple questions on their mind. Question number one, how am I changing the material conditions for those people most marginalized in my community? So the question I ask myself every morning is, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, that's what my child does in the morning. He's dramatic in 3, and he'll be like, it's morning time, So I wake up in the morning and I'm like, all right, how am I changing the material conditions for Black people? That's the question I ask myself. And when I think about Black people, I'm thinking about the intersections, right? I'm thinking about all Black lives. I'm thinking about Black people who are immigrants. I'm thinking about Black people who are queer, who are trans. I'm thinking about Black young people. I'm thinking about Black people who are sitting inside a cage. I'm thinking about Black people who've been convicted of felonies. I'm thinking about all of us. And so that's the question I ask myself. And the second question I ask myself is, what I did yesterday getting me closer to freedom? Is what I did yesterday getting me closer to freedom? And these are two important questions. They might feel really big and philosophical, but they help guide me in my everyday life around being a community organizer. So that's number one, right? That's the question you're asking yourself, those questions. Number two, a community organizer is in an organization. You see me? You feel me? Okay, let me tell you why this is important, okay? You're not a community organizer if you are an individual. You may be an influencer, you may have 1 million followers, you might have a lot of people seeing you, but if you're not actually in connection into some sort of organization, that doesn't have to be a big institution, that could be a collective, that could be a group of people who are doing a reading group who are like, you know what, we're gonna take on, you know, the local libraries because they need to do more shit in our community, something. Could be, but some form of community, right? That's why it's called community organizer. So one individual influencer, that's not a community organizer, although they might do great work. I know a lot of those influencers, we're in a really weird time where like, you're an influencer. You know, people call me all the time, can you come and be an influencer? I'm like, I don't know what that means. I could be a community organizer because that's what I do. So that's number 2, right? You're in sort of some institution. When I say institution, how many people feel skeptical when I use that word, institution? Raise your hand. Yeah, me too. You should be. You should feel skeptical. But that doesn't mean we don't join it, right? And what you do, and my good friend Charlene Carruthers, I teach her book at Prescott College in my leadership development course. Charlene Carruthers says, join the institution that's most politically aligned with your own values. You don't join an institution that's not politically aligned with your values, right? We try to destroy those. You join the institution that you feel like is asking those questions, those first 2 questions. You join that institution. Okay, so we got those 2 down, right? So number 3, and I'm thinking about this all the time as technology changes and, you know, we have access to more people because we have this thing called the World Wide Web and social media, but an organizer is really just the smallest unit in which we actually organize other people to come join our movement. We're not actually the most important thing. We are of great importance. But what's actually more important is the role we play in building people's power. So this is different than, say, an advocate. An advocate, which I generally hate that word, so I'm so sorry if you consider yourself an advocate. But I want to just change the framing a little bit, because an advocate says that you go out on behalf of others. I'm not actually interested in anybody talking for me. What we are doing as organizers is we are growing up in our neighborhoods. You know, I grew up in the hood and Van Nuys and Los Angeles. I grew up with a lot of police, and I didn't have organizers knocking on my door. There was no social media at that point, believe it or not, people who were born in the 90s. And some maybe of you in the 2000s, which is so weird to me. But we had each other, right? And I remember as I grew up and started to become politicized, being like, oh, I know what I want to do. I don't want to leave the hood. I want to actually build power in the hood. So this becomes critical as an organizer, is thinking about how are you building power? How are you building power of the most marginalized? And some of you are the most marginalized, right? I was the most marginalized, Black, queer, woman, poor, in my neighborhood. And so I didn't want someone coming in and being a savior. And gratefully so, I had an organization that was uninterested in being saviors. In fact, they were like, we're gonna train you to go back into your hood and organize to build power. Some of you are not the most marginalized. We still need to train you to go into hoods and build power. And we need to train you to do it respectfully and authentically and in a way that's about co-conspiratorship, right? Not saviorship. So that's the last sort of piece around community organizers. Of course, there's a lot of different nuances, a lot of different ways we can talk about it. Lots of people have written books on it. I just talked about my homegirl, Charlene Carruthers. You should definitely get her book. And to me, in this day and age where we have this weird obsession with social media, me included, I mean, Black Lives Matter was created on social media, we forget about the very basics, the foundation of organizing. And just because our social media might be able to get hundreds of people, sometimes thousands, sometimes millions to marches or rallies, at the end of the day, my questions are, what am I doing to change the material conditions for those most marginalized? In my case, it's Black people. Is what I did yesterday getting me closer to freedom? And am I building the power of the people who are closest to the pain? Am I doing that? Some days I'm successful. Some days I am, and I'm like, oh yes, this is exactly this is a sweet spot, great. Some days I look back and I'm like, dang, I just did like a bunch of panels and a bunch of meetings. I didn't talk to nobody really. And that, we have to assess. We cannot be perfect organizers. I'm not interested in being a perfect organizer. But we have to assess. And that actually takes me to storytelling time. Sorry guys, I'm just gonna be doing this because the super bloom is attacking me. Which takes me to July 13th of 2013. And on that day, I was actually up in Susanville, California, which is a small little military prison town, 11 hours from Los Angeles, just right on the Nevada-California border. And I was visiting one of my mentees, Richie Reseda, who had just been convicted of a sentence, and he received 10 years, 85% time. And I was there for the weekend spending time with him. And I remember waiting to get the verdict for George Zimmerman. We were supposed to get it on Friday, but the jury decided that they weren't ready. So I went to go visit Richie on that Saturday. We had a whole sort of political conversation. I had known Richie since he was 14 years old. He was one of my first recruits into the organization that I had organized. I promised him that I would not leave him, even in his moment of really becoming a pariah in society. Nobody's left behind. And so I went to visit him, and he had his own feelings, conflicts about George Zimmerman and the verdict and what was going to happen. And so I went back home, and his wife was with me, Taina Vargas, and his best friend, Haywan Asphalt. And I went inside the motel room, and I waited for the verdict, and I went on social media. And as I was on Facebook at the time, I started to see that the verdict was coming down. People were, Facebooking about it. And it said, not guilty, and then eventually not guilty on all charges. And I promise y'all, I really thought there was gonna be some sort of guilty verdict. And as an abolitionist, that's not sort of the thing that I'm, waiting on. I'm not waiting on the criminal justice system to save our lives. In fact, it's ruining our lives. But I just was like, we all knew that this guy killed Trayvon Martin, right? That was fact. That wasn't the debate. But as I started to rewind and think about the trial, I started to realize that George Zimmerman was never on trial. Trayvon was on trial for his own murder. And that, in fact, the way that it was set up was for us to all believe, and for the jury to believe, that George Zimmerman was fighting for his life, although he was the one who hunted and stalked and eventually killed Trayvon. And so as I'm looking at the not guilty verdict, I remember the feeling and the feelings and the sensations in my body. Every time I tell the story, it's like it's like I'm there. I felt tingling in my arms. I felt like a tightness in my chest. I felt the ball in my throat, and I just remember crying. And I remember looking at Haywan and Taina and being like, how am I gonna save them? How am I gonna save them if, in fact, in this country, you can kill a Black person and everybody knows you did, and you could get away with it? And then the second thought came up, which is, how am I changing the material conditions for Black people? And I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna let this dude get the period to this story. He doesn't get to have the period to the story. So I went online, and I was like cursing and yelling at people like, if you're not talking about Trayvon, get off my timeline. I was acting up. And I went to Alicia Garza's page, and she had written a love note to Black people, and her love note ended with Black Lives Matter. And I saw those 3 words and I was like, that's it. That's our call to action. And right underneath her post, I did a simple hashtag, Black Lives Matter. And she hit me up and she was like, what's that? And I was like, she's a little bit older than me, so, you know. So I had to be like, it's a hashtag, girl. It's what makes this thing go viral. And we, within 48 hours, claimed the space. We didn't have millions of followers. In fact, I maybe had 200 followers on Twitter. I was, you know, a community organizer, grinding in my neighborhood, going after the sheriff's department at the time. And I said to her and dozens of other Black people, this is our call to action, Black Lives Matter. And on July 15th of 2013, I wrote a Facebook note and I said, hey everybody, Alicia and I started this thing, it's called Black Lives Matter. We hope that it impacts, we hope that it changes the world. And now we're here. And over the last 6 years, Black Lives Matter has not just changed the conversation in the United States, it has changed the global conversation around race, around gender, around violence, around harm, and more importantly, around what it means to imagine Black people living, what it means to value our lives, and our relationship and connection to other marginalized communities. And so Black Lives Matter becomes a call to action, a cry for urgency. It becomes a resounding light. It becomes a place to galvanize around conversations, around political action, and it becomes this marker in history. It became a marker in history. A few days after that post, Alicia, Opal Tometi, who's our 3rd co-founder, who also is from Phoenix, Arizona, who hails from Phoenix, a child of Nigerian immigrants. And she came to us and said, hey, you know, I went to school for communications. I want to blow this up. She created all the infrastructure for our communications. And so 3 Black women, and I think hopefully people know this by now, started Black Lives Matter, contrary to popular belief. And 3 Black women who identify as organizers. We never identified as influencers or people who, you know, were so sort of clued into social media. We just knew that we were hurting. We knew that we were tired of Black people being gunned down in the street and it getting barely a news article. We knew that it was going to take our generation because unfortunately, while our relationship with the old guard is way different than it was then, at that point, the old guard was in bed with the Democratic Party. The old guard wasn't having these conversations around state violence. And when they were having it, they were picking the perfect victim. So part of our challenge in the next few years as organizers, and you're going to recognize this as you develop your own campaigns, is a couple things happen. Number one, if you're at the margins, it takes a while for people to start listening to you. So while we started to yell out Black Lives Matter, we started to talk to people in the choir, you know, the folks, our own organizers, and be like, all right, y'all, so we're about to use this phrase, Black Lives Matter. We want you to use it in your own organization. And some people would stop us. They'd be like, well, are you sure you want to use the word Black? Like, it's a little controversial. And we would say, no, we deserve to say Black. We deserve to call for a conversation around Blackness. So first we started within our own circles, right? And this is the phrase for this, and I learned this from one of my mentors, is winning the battle of ideas. So as you remember those first few years that Black Lives Matter ends up going viral, what's the thing that people started saying in opposition to Black Lives Matter? We know this so well now, right? We know the script. I just was dealing with the All Lives Matter situation on Instagram right before I pulled up here. And you know, this conversation becomes very fascinating because the All Lives Matter people start to, and it wasn't just white folks. It was non-black, often folks of color, right? Because I get it, in our marginalized communities, we start to feel like, wait a second, why aren't we talking about everybody? Like, it's not fair, and we're going through issues too. And so what we said to people is like, when we say Black Lives Matter, that's not a way to exclude. Black Lives Matter is not exclusionary. In fact, Black Lives Matter is probably the most inclusive thing that you could say in this moment. Because we're not just calling for Black people to show up for it. We're calling for all people to show up for Black Lives Matter. And we have this conversation, we've had this conversation over and over again, which is we believe deeply, right, that this country and this government was founded on two things. It was founded on stolen people and stolen land. So we have to talk about it. Who are those stolen people? They're Black people. And at the very foundation of this country, the United States of America, has been first the extraction of Black people's labor, and then quickly realizing, oh shit, we don't know what we're gonna do with them now that they're free, was the slow demise, right? Sometimes quick, but oftentimes slow. It's called ethnocide. And so we have to have this conversation. If we want to change the material conditions, we have to have the honest and brave conversation about Black people. And at the end of the day, when Black people get free, we all get free. So that's what we did, and that's what we've been doing for 6 years, right? As trying to win the battle of ideas. And so it's my favorite thing when I'm like overhearing someone in a restaurant, often like a little old white lady, and she's talking to her friend, and they start to talk about Black Lives Matter, and then one says, well, what about all lives matter? And the white lady says, no, because, and then she goes into it, I'm like, wow, we won. Because this white woman, I don't know how she heard this. She's heard it enough because we've said it enough. She's now reciting the very same conversation that I've had over and over and over again. And that's what we want. We want us to show up, but we also want our allies. We want our co-conspirators to be able to hold that conversation down when we're not around, right? That's part of the work. You don't just show up in community ready to advocate when you're in community. You show up when you're also sitting with your racist uncle. You show up also when you're sitting with your xenophobic mom. You show up also when you're sitting with your auntie who's transphobic, right? We have to bear the weight of those conversations because it means someone else will be able to survive. When we decide to have those conversations, those hard ones that might make us squirm, a little uncomfortable, I'm younger than them, maybe they're not gonna listen to me. Sometimes our conversations allow for those people at the margins to survive. So the last 6 years have been the most amazing and powerful time of my life, but it's also been the most trying. It's also been the most dangerous. And the last 6 years, Black Lives Matter was called a terrorist organization, right? And the last 6 years, we've seen the rise of white nationalism and white supremacy, right? It is no coincidence that a Black Power movement happens and then a Nixon happens. It is no coincidence that a Black Power movement happens and then a 45 happens, right? These things are not in vacuums. This is a part of history. And so as we learn our history and we know our history, we get to understand what's at the present and we get to understand what's in the future. So, I was one of those people who are incredibly skeptical. I was like, no way 45 is going to be able to be the president. Like, that'll make no damn sense. We're way smarter than that. Even though I should have known better because Arnold Schwarzenegger was our governor in California. I should have known. So, I was one of those people, skeptical. And as Black Lives Matter, we played a huge part of the 2016, presidential candidates campaign. We did a lot of interrupting and challenging. I think it was here in Phoenix, Arizona, Netroots Nation, where we did one of the first actions against the presidential candidates. You could see me yelling and screaming on a stage. I was actually pregnant there. I didn't know that, but it makes sense now. I was full of a lot of hormonal rage. So, we spent a lot of our time interrupting the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and folks were mad at us. Some folks were like, good job. A lot of folks at that convention were pissed. They were like, these are the people who are on your side. And I was like, that's not true. Because what we've seen over and over again for the Democratic Party and why many of the candidates now are actually talking that talk is because we put their feet to the fire. Let us not forget that it's a Democratic Party that created 3 strikes. It's a Democratic Party that created the crime bill. It's a Democratic Party that has allowed for so much strife in our communities and milked our votes without actually working for us. And so we were in a position in 2016 to tell the truth, as we are in a position now in 2019. And in 2016, we took them to task. And on the night of the election, I was like, all right, we gonna get Hillary, cool, we'll work it out. And I was convinced that while I wasn't excited about a Hillary, I was like, cool, like we know how to fight this, we know how to work this. I was not prepared that we were going to vote in a fascist. I was not prepared. And I don't think many of us were prepared. As a collective, maybe individuals, I know a lot of people who were my friends were like, oh, not a lot, but a few folks were like, yes, he could get in office, this is possible. I thought they were being conspiracy theorists. And rather quickly, as he won Wisconsin and all these states, I was like, oh my God, like he's gonna win. And at the very same time, I was working on a local election for the state of California, which was to legalize marijuana. Poor Arizona. Y'all will get there. Y'all will get there. You leading us on other things, but y'all will get there. So I'm excited because we know we're gonna win that. Like it was like, numbers were coming in. We were above the threshold. I was like, we gotta legalize marijuana, recreational use at that. We got this. So I'm sitting in a hotel, with folks for Prop 64, and I'm also watching the elections. And we get the sort of news, breaking news. Hillary Clinton calls in to, what is it called? Concede. And I was like, what the F? Where are we right now? What twilight zone did we enter? And I remember sort of being like, is he really good? Did this really happen? And I think this happens when you're grieving, 5 stages of grief, denial. So for the first 24 hours I was in denial, and I was like, how bad could it be? Okay, fine, he became the president, but he was, how bad can it be? And it's been horrible. And it's been every day for those first 2 weeks, I started to be like, okay, where can I move? I need to flee. We had already been called terrorists. I just had a kid. Is this the place I want to grow him up in? Is this the fight I really want to have? And I was having all these conversations, and at some moment, if you haven't had that as an organizer, you'll have it, and you'll probably continue to have it. And so I had sat my mom down already, yo, probably gonna be moving, this ain't the way. I had a whole situation. And 2 weeks in, I guess that's when the grief settles. And I said, you know what, I'm an organizer. And now of all times, those questions, how am I changing the material conditions? These are the questions I have to ask in this moment. And I just started to have flashbacks of history, I started thinking of Nazi Germany and what were organizers thinking then? And how were they handling the conditions then? And I joined the team again. I came back. And as my kid says to me, whenever I leave, you came back. So I came back and I felt very fragile and I felt so disoriented. And I was like, I've never fought a fascist before. I don't even know if I'm using that term correctly. Like all these ways of having this conversation. And I just remember the circles and circles of meetings that organizers started to have. Like, okay, how can we do, what work can we do locally to shape the national? What national work can we do so we can shape the global? How do we make sure this fool is not gonna, you know, all these things that we start to ask ourselves as organizers. And now, as we are sort of working our way through the trauma and the decimation that this national government continues to move forward, I feel very, very proud of this movement. In fact, what we've seen in the rise of white nationalism is the rise of a movement in the millions. We've seen some of the dopest, freshest immigrant rights groups show up and challenge, push back. We've seen more protests, more communities showing up, fighting back. We're seeing some of the most brilliant elected officials rise up in power. It's the first time I've ever heard elected officials say things that I understand, that aren't vague platitudes. We're watching women's movement take on sexual assault and violence in ways that I don't think we've ever seen. And so while every day may feel like we're walking on eggshells, we don't actually know what this government is going to do, what the next executive order is going to look like, who's going to be impacted, how we show up for those most marginalized. I feel like both the institutions, the groupings, the communities, and the collectives that have shown up we're putting all of ourselves on the line, all of our bodies and our hearts and our spirits. For those of you who believe in ancestors, our ancestors are at our backs, at the hundreds, at the thousands. And it's a time to be alive. It's a time to be alive. And for all of us who are dealing with a family member who's either just been picked up by ICE, local police department, some of our family are sitting and languishing in a detention center or a jail or a prison. Some of us, our families are sitting at borders. Some of us, our families are not getting the health care they deserve, the mental health care they deserve. Some of us, because we are at the margins, while we are fighting for this bigger, more beautiful, more radical dream for our communities, we're actually living and suffering right now. So I don't want to take that away. But what I want to say to y'all as organizers, as artists, and as people who are trying to figure out your role, now of all times is the best time to join. Now of all times is the best time to be like, you know what? Maybe I didn't call myself an organizer before this, but I'm gonna call myself an organizer now. And I'm gonna join this group, and I'm gonna join this movement, because our lives don't just depend on it. Our descendants' lives depend on it. And if we wanna see a planet that can survive 100 years of climate change, right now we have to show up for it. We can't wait. We literally don't have time. And this is, I'm not a person, like I said, you know, I was tripping on those people who thought 45 could be, I thought, conspiracy theorists. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm sober. I'm sober about the realities. I'm sober about what we're living in. I feel it and I see it every single day. But I get a vantage point that some people don't get, which is I get to work with some of the most brilliant organizers. I get to train people who are going to be brilliant organizers. Richie Reseda, the brother who I was visiting, Richie Reseda started an organization with his wife called Initiate Justice. And he was like, you know what? He was sitting inside prison. I remember He got in a bunch of fights when he was first in the county jail, and I remember him calling me right before he was getting in one fight, and he said, all right, I'm about to fight this dude, you know, it was all gang shit, and I was like, listen, you get to decide if you want to still be an organizer no matter where you're at. You could be in a jail cell, you could be on the border, you could be in a detention center, you could be in a healthcare facility, but your identity as an organizer doesn't have to change. And he went into Soledad State Prison and he started a program called Success Stories. And out of Success Stories, he's trained over 100 men challenging patriarchy. Challenging patriarchy in probably one of the most patriarchal places outside of the military. And then Richie Reseda built an organization called Initiate Justice, really looking at the ways that he can get himself out sooner than 8.5 years. And as he started to meet more men who were doing sentences that were longer than his, him and his wife started working with elected officials at the state assembly. And they created what would become Prop 57 in the state of California. And they brought a bunch of people on board, including my organization, DPN, and they won. And it was a thing called good time credits. If you do groups like Success Stories or other types of groups, you can get good time credits and get your time off. And Richie is home. He was supposed to be released in 2020. March of 2020, he came home last year. And he is one of the most brilliant organizers. After almost 20 years of knowing him, his spirit and his drive to change the material conditions for Black people has not changed. It didn't change when he was inside the county jail, and it didn't change when he was in Susanville State Prison or in Soledad State Prison. It doesn't change as he lives in Hollywood, California. And my quest for this team here in the room is you take the time to think about these questions. You know, who's the marginalized group you're fighting for, and why? How does that marginalized group intersect with other marginalized groups? What have you done yesterday to ensure the freedom of you, your people, other people? And how are you building power? How are you building the power of people most closest to the pain? Thank you. Thank you, y'all. So I think we have time for questions. Yeah, and if you could stand up and say your name and where you're from.
Hi, everybody. My name is Soledad. I also go by Sole. And I had a question, like we were talking about like master narratives.
Where are you from?
Oh, Denver, Colorado.
Woo!
Denver, Colorado. So we were like talking about like master narratives and like kind of trying to predict like you to like understand like the opposition, like what sides they're going and like what their ideas and their plans are, like within like the Black Lives Matter movement and like just elsewhere, like how do you even like predict that? Like it's like, because there's just so many different tactics that have been used that are like painful and like really like some like terrorist attack stuff, like really messed up. Like how do you even predict like what their plan is going to be, their narrative for this? Because I feel like they're always like 3 steps ahead. Sometimes we can be like that, but we're always like just catching up. I feel like we're always just like taking a breath.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. It's a great question. So number one, we don't have to make up what they're going to do because they've already done it so many times in history. So this is why I'm not a historian necessarily, but I love history and I think it's incredibly important. And as 45 was on his campaign, all of his rhetoric came from Reagan and Nixon. It was literally the same. Make America Great Again is not a new phrase. He just popularized it. So we have to look in history, and I beg this team, for especially folks who, even if you weren't born here, who live in this country, you know, America's very obsessed with its own narrative. So it makes it very insular, so we don't look at other movements. but I also beg we look at other movements and other peoples and other ways. So I bring up Nazi Germany and some people get very like, well, this is not Nazi Germany. Well, it's not what Nazi Germany became, but if you look at the history of where Nazi Germany, how it got there, we are definitely on that path. So we have to look at different places and causes to understand what we are dealing with now and where they will end up. Something also interesting, because technology is not the same as it was, even 10 years ago, but 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, is that their use of technology is way more sophisticated than ours. So, I think they really came up with doxing. Do people know what that is? Where many of us in our movement have been doxed. It means that they, sort of these bots, white supremacist bots, tell their other white supremacist bots to all cyberbully one person, and then they extract all your information, including your address, your family's names, all that. So that's happened a lot. So that kind of technological advancement, for whatever reasons white supremacists have a hold on it, we also should be better at understanding that, and understanding those tools around how we can amplify our causes, and also how we can be better at knowing that we will get attacked. We will. Attack is going to happen, whether that's in the cyber world or in the real world, but we have to be better at defending ourselves. And that is that's a conversation that has to be happening, and being creative about what defense looks like.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Esperanza.
My name is Sergio. I come from Prescott. So I know that Black Lives Matter was invited to the White House. And I know that social movements from above, some of the strategy that they use they respond in an accommodative way. Sometimes, most of the time, it's suppressive to social movements from below. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to know the decision that you made there, as opposed to challenging it. I just wanted to know why Black Lives Matter wanted to go to the White House in an accommodative.
In which presidency? I mean, during this presidency, because we have not been invited. You know that, right? Okay, so maybe this is also a good question to clarify, because I think sometimes everybody thinks, so people conflate Black Lives Matter, the organization, with Black Lives Matter, the movement. So Black Lives Matter, the organization, was invited to the White House, and we declined. And we declined that visit to the White House. Lots of other Black orgs were invited. They went. And they got to take their picture with Obama, and they got to sit around a fancy table, and they got to take a press opportunity. But we declined because we felt like, in solidarity with other marginalized communities, it was in contradiction to show up to the White House. As many folks know, Obama was one deporter in chief, the largest deportation. So we were very critical of him on that. We had felt like he had still not addressed Black people's needs, specifically around police violence. And we were incredibly disturbed by the wars he had initiated overseas. So we said no. Did you know that? You didn't know that? Okay, so when you were talking about Black Lives Matter, you were talking about the larger movement, right? Great. So I agree with your assessment that, sometimes, and this becomes tricky, right? So we have all these things that we do. People do a lot of good work, and then sometimes they're in contradiction to where we believe we should be going. I don't think it's a problem that those groups showed up to the White House. It's fine. I don't think it did any harm, but I think based off of our organizational principles, it didn't make sense to go meet with the president who wasn't willing to have the conversations and then put it into practice in the action. So we gave Obama a hard time, and I'm glad we did. And we will never show up to this White House, even if we're invited. Please stand up, stand up, tell us who you are, name.
My name is Jewel Fletcher, I'm also from Colorado. I'm coming from DC, from Howard.
My question is, when you're developing the movement,
how do you transition that into organizational work successfully?
Tell me your name again.
Jua, J-U-A.
Jua? It's the question of the hour, Jua. Question of the hour. You do it with a lot of hard work, a lot of conversations, a lot of clarification on what your organization is and what it's doing. The first year of BLM, we were not an organization. We were a bunch of Black folks identifying around a phrase and using it online and offline. By the time the uprisings in Ferguson happened, we knew that we needed to have organization. We couldn't just sort of be a loose group of people going to protest. So we started, which would become the Black Lives Matter Global Network, with chapters across the country and now across the world. When we first started the Global Network, it was like, anybody, become a chapter. Well, that went sideways quickly. Some folks, that was great. They hit the ground running, it was really amazing. And then some people, opportunists really, that sort of were like, oh, this is my opportunity to become like an influencer, right? Not an organizer. And what we started to see is people using Black Lives Matter as a way to advance their own agendas versus the agenda of the organization. So then we started to have to clarify, okay, hold up, not everybody become a chapter. This is actually this is what it looks like to become a chapter. So it takes a lot of concentrated work and effort. I would also say that at 6 years into it, there's a lot of shit I didn't know, and we didn't know, right? Like, we didn't know that, first of all, we didn't realize we were starting a global organization. And then we learned a lot of things on the job, just like by like, oh, okay, well now this person's using Black Lives Matter to talk about the fight against abortions. There's a whole campaign, people use BLM. It was crazy. So we had to start really clarifying. It's why, even though some people may have heard the story of the Black Lives Matter many times or know it, it's why I repeat it every single time I go somewhere. Because you can never repeat something enough. And the more you repeat something, the more people realize, oh, actually that's how I should be talking about this, not in this way. I think, yeah.
My name is Momo. I'm here from Tucson.
Yeah, whoa.
And so I was kind of wondering, you spoke about like doxing and tags that can happen in real life or online.
Yeah.
And as a person who's been in the work for so long, how do you take care of yourself? And how do you recognize the signs when it's kind of like, because you talked about that withdrawal from possibly coming from like a place of fear. Yeah. But how do you take care of yourself when, it's just like the day to day and you're like, you're feeling the withdrawal and you're feeling some of those signs in your body showing up.
Yeah. Well, let me say this, and this is not a diss on our movement, because our movement is not the issue, but our movement culture is. So we are in a movement culture, and I was trained this way too, is you just keep going. And you bulldoze through tears, and you bulldoze through aches and pains, because it's bigger than you, right? How many times have you said it to yourself, or you've even said it to other organizers, or your organizational culture might have not said that directly, but you could feel it, right? We don't stop here. So we have to actually change our culture. No one else is going to change it for us, Like many of us are sort of like, we have like, what is the term called? String budgets? No, shoestring budgets. We have shoestring budgets. Many of us maybe even start our own organizations, or we're in a little town. We have to create a different way of being inside our movement because, first of all, my homeboy always says this to me. He's like, if I didn't know no better, like I wouldn't want to join the movement. Y'all look tired all the time. You're stressed out. You're like, so, he always makes fun of me. But it's true. Like folks be having frowns on their face and shit. Like, we should be able to have fun and like feel like we are, it's also celebratory. So a few things. I'm a big fan of therapy. I don't care what age you are. Like when my child starts to be able to like have more formed thoughts, he'll probably go to therapy, because why not? Like, the more support, the better. You know, a big like sort of call to action I have is when Black folks finally get reparations, we'll all have our own therapist. Like, that'll be a part of the reparations package, like therapy. So if you don't have insurance, there should be like clinics that have low-cost therapy. I encourage that. If you have an organization, you should actually offer it to your members, to your organizers and your staff. We do at our organization. We have to force people in our organization to take time off. So I'm just giving you really practical things. So we literally shut the office down for the last 3 weeks of December. No one's allowed to work because folks will still work. We have to create environments of care. I'm not saying that people need to come to our movement to end up being healed. The movement can be healing, but we have to go be proactive in our own healing. That's not what I'm saying, but we have to create environments of care. Because many of us who are entering into this work are just as traumatized as the people that we're trying to build power for. So we're dealing with our own, I keep cursing and there's a child in the room, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm tired and I'm also wound up because I'm dealing with my own. So we're dealing with our own stuff, and then we have to organize people who are also dealing with their own stuff. And we're not case managers. Many of us weren't trained social workers. So then we end up doing the things that case managers or social workers were doing without that kind of support. So as we're entering into this work, we have to start having a different conversation about how we're caring for ourselves, our environment, our membership, our staff. That takes time. It takes a kind of deliberateness. It takes a kind of also study. Like, just because we know the word trauma doesn't mean we understand it. So we have to study. You know, we have to study, and we have to ask for outside expertise. I'm not a person who's like, we all do it inside our organization. Like, no, you ask for outside expertise. So there's a really dope sort of crew that's forming right now. Y'all probably know Patrisse Cullors from Phoenix. That's my homegirl. We grew up together. So she created a group called Resilient Strategies. Her, Mark Anthony Johnson, and Prentice Hemphill are creating a firm to support movements and to support organizations in creating more resilient strategies inside their organizations. So it's a long response, but I actually want to start in the preventative, because many of us end up having to intervene. And once we get to intervention, we've probably already lost the person from wanting to stay, or lost ourselves from wanting to stay in the movement. And this isn't a movement that's like survival of the fittest. That's some old school right there. Like, we should not be thinking survival of the fittest. We should be thinking the more, the merrier, the more, the healthier. That's how we should be orienting ourselves. And it's gonna take some time. I entered in with some bad habits that was trained into me. I came in at 16 years old, and I grew up with a mom who had to be a workaholic. Right? She had 4 kids, she had 3 jobs. So like, I was already like, oh yeah, you just work until you're sick. You work yourself until you're sick, or you work yourself until you're so tired you have to sleep. That's how I'm wired. So I have to unwire and, you know, make requests, and it takes time. It takes time, and it takes a support system. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Gomez. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. And so I really thank you for being here today. And I'm not one to be involved in things I'm not clear, don't know really a lot about. So I have not joined the Black Lives Movement, just because what I have read does not reflect what the face of our organizer in Madison does. So it's kind of like, I'm not really sure if this is what I want to be involved with. So I really do appreciate you coming here, because you did clarify some things, and I do want to more connect with you and kind of get a more clear focus on that. So my question is, when you talk about building power, what does that mean? What does that look like? Yeah. Like building power for the community?
It's a beautiful question. Okay. So there's a few kind of like rubrics, but when I think about building power, I'll take myself as an example. when I joined my first civil rights organization, I didn't actually know that they were building my power. I just thought they liked me. They're like, she talks a lot. She got some stuff to say. But what I realized, now I realize after, once they started to be like, okay, go recruit people, I was like, oh, you're training me to do that. Okay. So basically, you know, it's, your organization has to actually have an assessment around building power. And so if you're part of an organization or a collective or a group, you know, some people are just sort of a part of a cadre system where it's like we have 10 strong people and we are, you know, just kind of building our team up and we do things on behalf of the community. But I'm actually talking about something different, which is going out and bringing people into the organization. Sometimes it's into a campaign. So I'll give you sort of the play-by-play about how I was organized. I met these organizers. I was at a youth leadership conference. I met these organizers. They were saying the dopest things to me. They're talking about racism and taking down the government. And I was like, yes, I'm in. That's what I want to do. So I went to them. I said, hey, the question I asked them, because what I was most interested in, which is no surprise, was like, hey, do you go after the police department? And they were like, no, we don't do that, but we are environmental justice people. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but I'm in, because you were saying the right things. So the first thing I ever did was join the environmental justice movement. And I started to learn about greenhouse gases. I started to learn about the auto. I started to learn all these things, not because I was necessarily studying on my own, but the organization, as they were building, getting more people in and like training more young people, they started to teach us, like educate us on what was happening. And so while I was learning something bogus in my high school science class, I was actually learning about real life science and its impacts on my lungs, why I had childhood asthma, all these things, right? So that came from organizing. That came from the people. So that's one way of building power, is educating the community, right? So the second way of building power is like, okay, so if we've educated you, you want to know who's in charge of these greenhouse gases? It's actually this government institution that you pay taxes on. Like, now we're going to go after them. So the second phase was them like taking me to a public meeting, which you have no idea these things are public because nobody tells you they are. So I go to a public meeting with all mostly old people. I'm 16, I'm confused. I'm like, what are they talking about? But after the meeting's over, an organizer pulls me inside and asks me, what did you hear in that meeting? And I said, I mostly heard womp, 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 and then this thing. And they'd be like, okay, well, let's break this down. So they take the time to sort of break that down. Then the next meeting, they say, you know what, Patrisse, you had childhood asthma, right? We're going to actually train you how to speak during public comment, during this public meeting. And I remember being 17 and being like, I don't know what to say, like how to, and they said, just tell your story. So I wrote my story down. I gave it to an organizer. We went over it. We went over the speech. And for the first time ever, I get to address the people who caused my childhood asthma. One way of building power. Now you get to confront the people who have created the conditions that you're trying to change. Okay. So then that happens. Then the next step around that is, oh, Patrisse, you know, you're speaking. We'd like to actually have you be a part of, you know, the planning committee, which is a committee that helps plan where the organization's going strategically. Obviously, I was a part of an organization that had a lot of structures to build my power. So I joined this committee, and I started to be in the committee. And then a year down the line, Patrisse, you're showing a lot of great progress. We want you to think of a campaign that you think would be really important for the community. So I go and talk to I go back to my old high school. I ask students what they're dealing with. We realize that young people are having a hard time getting their bus passes. So I start to lead a bus pass campaign to get free bus passes. So this is the sort of structure and helping build power for those at the margins. I'm just one young organizer. There's 15 other young organizers that are getting this same treatment to help them build their leadership. That's going to help them build a campaign. And then 11 years later, I left that organization and started my own organization. Is that helpful?
I think you probably answered a little bit of what I was going to ask. So my name is Solicia Lopez. I'm from Denver, Colorado. And I'm here bringing our young people to experience this as we strengthen our power in Denver. And my purpose in life is to build power in our young people so that they can go off into the world and join us in the cause, right? Whichever cause that is for them. But I think I struggle right now. Maybe this is a little bit for me too. I've positioned my work very uniquely inside of the education institution. So inside of the district, which I, up until this point, have been very under the radar, if you will, until now that my students are flourishing. I think the cat's out of the bag. So it's an interesting space, but I think I've heard a lot this in the last day and a half, and I hear this from my students all the time. You know, they hit a level of what they feel is defeat. You know, whether that comes from us as their mentors or other educators or other people that, you know, trusted people that they're around in their schools every day, because I'm really pushing to have our students push inside of their schools. And they have trusted relationships with people inside of those schools, right? And so sometimes that hinders their confidence and their ability, and they start to lose sight of like their strategy, right? And that's where I push them, like, okay, what's the real strategy here, right? How do we help you move forward and build a movement at your school with your peers? And then, I mean, that's just something, like I said, I think it might be in part for me too, like in this piece in my journey of like, how do we push them over that, you know, how do I support them, and we as a community support them over that hump and really truly allow them to be the leaders of the cause. We have a lot of adults in our community who like to take over, you know, once our students have a strong platform, they like to co-opt their voice. And so that's just real life challenge for us right now in Denver. And like, I'd love to just hear your thoughts. But I think hearing you say too, you know, these are the things that like help me realize how to use my voice, right? Which I think is important, and oftentimes a very specific coaching piece, right? Of like, our voice is extremely powerful, but with strategy, it's even more powerful, right? But I don't know if that was a question or a thought or something to ponder.
I feel like there's a lot of thoughts in there, which are super helpful, and I think we should always be reflecting. Number one, I'll just say this up front, is we're not going to win everything. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow as a young person, because I'd be like, I worked so hard on this. Why did we win? And I remember one of the older organizers said to me, you know, Patrisse, we don't win everything. And while those victories, when we do have a victory, claim them, claim all the victories. I'm a big fan of claiming your victories. That we also have to remember that we're doing this work for the long haul, right? That this fight is a fight that is for us, and I hope we will see it, but it's not. We don't often get to. So we're laying the foundation for hopefully the next generation to pick it up, and so that's number one. And number two, I think, you know, for younger folks. What was really important for me and my organization, while it was intergenerational, that we weren't doing this weird segregation of youth and adults, and that when we were developing our movement, and we were developing the movements, of course, you know, adults were leading, but so were young people, and we were doing it in a way that was not about sort of tokenizing the youth voice. It really bothered me as a young organizer when they'd be like, the youth over there, you youth. And I'd be like, yes, I am a young person, I am, and I have a lot to learn, and I want to from this team, but I also want to do this in a way that's intergenerational. And so just developing our movements and our causes and our campaigns that really are truly and authentically intergenerational, I think is incredibly important. And that young people feel their skills and their assets are being heard and listened to and developed, but also that as young people, you know, we also, well, I'm not a young person anymore, but when I was a young person, I also wanted adults to like train me in a particular way, and I wanted that training. I thought I would not be who I am today if I didn't have that type of training. So having that balance is incredibly important. Sometimes, you know, because for those of us who are part of nonprofits, Like we have this weird youth focus because that's how our funding works. And it kind of leads how we have the conversation, and we gotta challenge that. And having to remember the training I received around developing young people. Like, we're developing leaders so they can be leaders. These young people are not gonna be young people forever. We're really training a new generation. Here and then here. Please stand.
Alessandra Chavira from the 303. As a youth, what like my peers and I have been struggling with lately, since we're all organizers, is like finding that balance between like prioritizing school and prioritizing like what we're passionate about, and like what's some advice you would give us?
Oh, I know your struggle, girl. That's been my literal struggle since I was 16 years old. Because I'm now in a master's program, and then my teachers be like, Patrisse Cullors, why are you on your phone? I mean, folks just got arrested in Atlanta, and I'm supposed to be helping with court support. It's hard. It's very, very hard, because being in school and doing the things that school does, like, you know, it's important. But then you're like, this is real life. Like, this is real life right here. And I have to, this is what I do. This is what I've been doing. I've had enough years now to sort of understand this better, which is school is not for anybody else but me. So part of prioritizing school is also prioritizing me. And because we are our outside work, our movement work is often feels like our biggest priority, which it probably is. It is my biggest priority. I'm also my big priority. And so school is only a leverage to get you where you want to go next. And we can't forget that. So I've had to have serious conversations with myself. I've only said yes to certain things this semester. I'm about to graduate in May. I have a thesis due, blah, 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 blah. Thank you. And I've had to tell myself, this is for me, and I get to have this time for me. And while I don't love all my classes, and I don't love everybody on my thesis committee, like, I have a plan and a goal for my life, and I want to make sure I meet that plan and goal. And so, you know, if someone asks me, you know, come to this event and da-da-da-da-da-da, I've been saying, no, I can't do anything from April 1st to April 18th to have my thesis show. So like all this stuff that's really helping me reorient what's for me. And then obviously the movement work is for me too, but it's also for a lot of other people. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah. Over here and then over here.
My name is Victoria Tapor, and also from Denver, Colorado.
Y'all are repping so tough. Love it.
And I was wondering, when you're in an organization or a group, what is the best way to identify a reachable goal, and how do you get there?
Ooh. Okay, so never identify the goal alone, first and foremost. Whenever you're about to launch a campaign, I'm a big fan of not even doing it with, like, you know, just your peer group. Community research is always key. So maybe you have a hunch, right? Let me give you an example. In LA, when I worked on ending the daytime curfew law, we had a hunch that students were being ticketed for being late to school. We didn't have the numbers or the data. In fact, the Los Angeles School Police Department didn't have numbers or data, but we went out and started doing research. And we developed a survey, we did all this community research. And one summer, 15 organizers interviewed 1,000 students. And we got all this data back that was like, yes, in fact, young people are being ticketed for being late to school, but we're seeing the consequences. Because what happened often was a young person would get ticketed, not once, sometimes up to 5 to 10 times during their 4 years of high school. It deterred a lot of young people from wanting to go to school, because they're like, well, if I'm gonna be late, why would I even show up? Two, many of the students, once they were ticketed, they didn't actually pay the tickets because they were too scared to tell their parents. So then they would end up having all of their tickets would go into collections. So when they were 16 years old or 18 years old trying to get their license, they couldn't get a license because they had all these tickets. So we started to learn all the impact, and we learned it from that community research. So we set a goal. Okay, the goal was we want to abolish the daytime curfew law in Los Angeles. And we developed a communications campaign, a whole master campaign around it. We developed, we started to say, okay, you know what? We have to actually organize. By that point, it was a consequence that young people were in the organization, but we weren't organizing youth or high school students. So we made an effort now we know we need to organize high school students. So that's how we sort of understood our goal. And then we started to meet with the city council because that's who would be able to change the daytime curfew law. And we started to see, okay, which city council person is going to be most interested in authoring a motion to end the daytime curfew law. It took us a couple years to get that person, but we did. And then we organized in the community so that we could change the attitudes around people who are late to school. The attitudes were often that, young people were criminals, their parents were negligent. So we had to do a really big messaging campaign around actually these young people are often the people who are taking care of their younger siblings when their parents have to go off to work. So they're ending up late to school because they had to drop off their younger sibling at the elementary school. So we started to learn all this, we learned all of this through our campaign. And then 6 years into the campaign, we won the ending of the daytime curfew law. Over here. Oh, wait. Here and then here. Sorry, Queendom.
My name's Johnny. I'm from Colorado too, and I kind of have a two-part question. The first one is after you get that first win in that time period where it's okay, so now what?
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? How do you create the next steps without feeling like you're still living in the past? And the other one is kind of how can I not be oh, I'm Johnny from this organization, but I'm Johnny from East High School, I'm 17 years old, this is my identity, I'm not just this, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And still be able to be yourself without having to be work all the time, you know what I mean?
Those are great questions. So how do you, okay, the first thing I'll say on this is I'm a big fan of having a larger strategy. So the campaign is not necessarily a strategy. Ending daytime curfew law is just a campaign that was a part of a larger strategy to abolish the police. Abolish the police and abolish prison. I'm an abolitionist. So that was one way of getting there. That wasn't the final goal. The final goal wasn't just to end the daytime curfew law, right? We still know that there's cops on campuses. We still know that young people are getting randomly searched. We still know all of these things about the conditions. So when we're thinking about, a victory, my hope is that we have one campaign in place so that once that campaign's won, we know what the next campaign's going to be. There's always a larger trajectory, and sometimes it shifts. It's not so clean, right? So with the daytime curfew law, like I said, I joined the organization I was with for 11 years doing environmental justice work. The reason why we started to take on daytime curfew was because while I was on the bus organizing people, I was organizing young people and hearing their stories. And I would go back to the office and be like, yo, all these young people are getting these truancy tickets. What are we going to do about it? So that was our pivot and shift into the criminal justice work. But there should be a larger strategy. Our larger strategy was to get bus-only lanes in Los Angeles to cut down the greenhouse gases by half. I mean, we had a whole science around how we were going to make Los Angeles cleaner and greener. And in that path, we were we pivoted, that work is still happening, but we pivoted to start taking on local police because we saw what they were doing to young people. So there should be sort of a bigger strategy. You shouldn't just have one campaign and be like, oh shit, what do we do now? You should know what the next several campaigns are going to be to get you to your larger goal. And then how do you have your own identity outside of identity of an organization? And I'm going to say two things to you. One, when you join an organization, that does become your identity. It doesn't have to become your only identity, but it's like when you join any team, you are a representative of your team. So you want to be able to represent. But there's also, it's really important that you have your own it's a contradiction because you also want to have your own identity. But that's not always easy. I think it's easier now given the kind of place we live in where people understand that we're trying to be better at seeing people as more than just one thing. So, you know, a great example is Cardi B, right? Cardi B is this rapper right now, but she's also been a stripper. She's been all these other things, and she's also super hood. And she doesn't deny that. She doesn't deny all the parts of her for respectability. So I think part of the work, and it's just cultural, is like, I remember when I joined my organization, the first thing they said to us was like, you are a representative of the organization 24/7 now. Like, you don't really have an identity. And that's kind of how I was trained. And then at the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of us were like, we're tired of respectability politics. Like, that's not gonna save us either. So I think it's honestly like an ongoing cultural conversation about how you are in something and you're representing it, but also that you are who you are too, and you bring your own, you know, sort of unique flavor to something. Someone with a hat.
My name is Kevin X. I'm from Napa Valley, California. And, thank you. And my question is, if you're walking with your counter-narrative lens, and how do you, well, let me rephrase it. If you're walking with your counter-narrative lens, how do you act upon these visual problems? Yeah, current visual problems, as if like these systematic problems are happening within our communities.
Mm-hmm. Like community stuff, like internal community
stuff.
It's a good question. I think there are some very good examples of. There's two things that I think about a lot. One thing I think about is like, for those of us who still live in the neighborhoods and communities that have, you know, intra-community violence, like, it's really important that we don't minimize that violence is happening and that harm is happening. I think it's also important that we support organizations and people that are doing work to help make our communities safer without law enforcement involvement. And so part of that work looks like simple stuff like knowing our neighborhood and knowing our neighbors. Developing real community relationships with the people who live right next door to us. Being able to identify when something's happening in our neighborhood where one would call the police, but we say we're deciding not to call the police. You know, we're gonna do something different here. And that takes a type of care and commitment to the community that is often on top of the work that we're already doing. So you know, Kevin, I think that's a great question, and I think that some of our, I don't think we have all the answers in our movement to that question, but I think that some people are thinking about it in different ways. A really dope group in North Carolina is doing this where they have like a no cop zone. So they take over a few blocks for like a week or so, and cops are not allowed in. And it really is an experiment on how to work with each other outside of using law enforcement or allowing law enforcement to come into the community. The reality is that we are in a moment, and it's not always been like this, but over the last 40 years, law enforcement has been pretty much the sole social service agency that has received more and more dollars, even though there's no real data on if they've been effective or not, right? So like a healthcare institution, nonprofits, for goodness sake, we have to give data. We've trained this many people, this was the outcome, this is what has happened. Law enforcement can go to city councils, to county board of supervisors, to state legislators, to national, and say, we need millions of dollars for this thing. And more often than not, they sort of just get that money without, you know, saying, well, this is gonna help in these ways. So part of the work that we have to do is reinvest dollars back into our communities. We have to say, actually, we need these social services that are not law enforcement, and all that money you're giving to law enforcement, that needs to be given back to us, and back to our neighborhoods, and back to our communities. Because often the reasons why our communities are doing harm or violence. You know, let's just say like theft or robbery or things like that. It's because people need to actually eat. They need to survive. And so the way we can intervene on that is by providing people with jobs, and providing people with access to healthy education, access to healthy food, and access to adequate education. So part of that work is both the work of us in our own community, but it's also the work of the state and challenging the state to give the resources and the places that they belong.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah?
If you all want to get a picture with Patrisse, we're going to have to end the questions here, but I don't know if you want to.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Let's take a picture.